Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from slushy Seattle.
Slushy Seattle. You had a little bit of snow, Zach.
We did. And everything shut down for 2 days. We had, I think, maybe an inch of snow.
Seattle not used to having snow settling on the ground.
No, exactly. And we have no equipment to deal with it and lots of caution. So the schools are the ones who they shut down. And so then we actually had a flashback to COVID days because the schools also require the kids to do it, like 2 hours of remote learning. And so our boys were connected. It was a joke. And honestly, our hearts are not, we're not into that. So we're like, whatever, we don't care. Whatever you do, just, it's a snow day.
Yeah. Just remembering those good old days.
Oh, man.
I think while you were enjoying a few snowflakes, I was up a ladder in Adelaide trying to get some work done on my parents' house before it hit 40 degrees or at least high 30s Celsius, which was a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
For me. It was pretty, you do expect that sort of weather in Adelaide in late January, early February, but yeah, they're very dry there. They haven't had rain for about 2 months. All the rainwater tanks are completely empty. Everything's very brown. And it's very dry. When I was there, the relative humidity was 22% at one stage, and it was pushing 38 degrees Celsius. That's well above 100 Fahrenheit. So yeah, once it gets to over 35 Celsius, it's not really much fun to be outside. So it's just a matter of finding an air conditioner and doing very little during the day. Yeah, that was my experience of getting back to Adelaide.
Could not be further from my reality at this moment, but yeah, that does not sound fun.
These are the extremes this time of year. It is what we expect. And I also reached out to some of my friends while I was in Australia for a week. We're going to be talking a little bit about fire resilience coming up, but we can talk a bit more about that because we've got a few things coming up on the pod and also around the accelerator. So we can talk more about that later. But for this week, we've got an interview that I did a couple of weeks ago with a Australian builder based in Victoria. So we'll get into that shortly. But before we do, we've got a few people to thank for their support.
Indeed. So a big thank you to Passive House for Everyone, which is InShow's amazing nonprofit, for being the accelerator partner of the week this week, Passive House Accelerator, and helping to make all of our programming possible, including this Passive House podcast. Thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thanks to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, Zola Windows. And thank you to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, and Source 2050.
Awesome. Now, I've said that Nick Sowden was in Victoria. He's actually based in New South Wales. He's just in fairly central to Sydney. He's in Balmain, New South Wales. And we have chatted before. I met Nick, I think, at a Passive House conference on the other side of the world when I heard a familiar accent at a Passive House conference in Germany. And I always love talking to builders because they are very practical, and it's great to hear their passion come through and their practical experience of doing Passive House in the real world, particularly in a market like Australia where it's pretty niche, and they managed to find a little market for themselves and get a business going of people who are interested in that real high level of performance. Nick has embraced that. He's got his own builder company, Sowden Building Solutions, and we chatted a while back. You can check that episode out. It's episode 131. We talked a bit about hempcrete and just Nick's journey towards Passive House. This time I reconnected him because we were talking about electrification, and we didn't talk a lot about electrification in this episode, partly because it's not really a big deal in Australia, passive house design and construction. It's just accepted as the way things are done, which I think is interesting in itself. So anyway, it was great to catch up with Nick again, find out a bit more about how things are going generally in and around Sydney and New South Wales, and the state of passive house at the moment in Australia. Welcome, Nick. We've got Nick Sowden of Sowden Building Solutions. So how are you going, Nick?
Very good, Matt. Yourself?
Good. Enjoying a relatively calm summer here. It's been pretty settled, and we're having some kind of cool evenings at the moment, which is nice. But I understand you've had some pretty hot weather in your part of the world, and about a bit of rain recently as well.
A bit of rain would be an understatement. I think
Yeah.
the road to the airport at the moment in Sydney, the Cooks River is coming over the bridge. Luckily, we've got other ways to get to the airport.
Prior to that, you had a bit of a heat wave, though, didn't you? You're getting up around the 40-degree Celsius.
Yeah, but I managed to miss most of that. I was in Japan on
Oh,
family
nice.
holidays.
Yeah. And so you're back into the swing of things for 2025. What type of projects are you working on at the moment?
We've got a small energy upgrade that we're doing to a double brick house. So we're basically insulating the entire building, bottom, injecting into the walls with Knuff superfill, making sure the external brickwork is now waterproof by using a vapor permeable siloxane, upgrading all the windows, solar's going on, and yeah, just upgrading the whole house, putting a HRV
What
in
what
there.
was that? What was that weatherproofing?
The brickwork, so you don't get moisture going through onto the superfill because you're taking away the brick cavity and
Yeah.
its ability to dry from inside. So now we're stopping it getting wet, the brickwork getting wet from the outside.
So you got two layers of brick with no insulation in it is the original construction, and you're putting blowing insulation, loose fill insulation into the space in between, and then having to do something to control the moisture because you're essentially connecting those two things together.
That's correct.
So was that something that you applied to the brick on the outside, or
Correct. Yeah, to spray on
right?
product. There are paint on products as well.
So does that change the appearance on the outside?
Not at all.
Oh, okay.
If you
So
want a face brick house to continue looking that way,
right.
you do that. The other alternative is paint it or
Yeah.
render it paint, but this is a lot more straightforward, a lot more cost effective, and it keeps with the heritage of the house.
Yeah. Interesting. Anyway, we wanted to talk about electrification. We could probably get sidetracked into talking about the multiple challenges of dealing with some of those uninsulated old homes, which I imagine keeps life pretty interesting for you as a builder. Give us a bit of an overview of where the market is at in terms of electrifying homes in and around Sydney and New South Wales.
For the work that we do, which is predominantly passive house and it's all high performing homes, most of the projects that we do, we are abolishing gas and fully electrifying all of the house.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're tackling the building envelope as well. So we're not putting undue stress on the electricity grid by having inefficient homes that we need to heat and cool massively.
And is that something that's driven by your clients, or are you just saying that's what you're doing? Is there any resistance to going electric?
Some clients resist on, oh, but we've cooked on gas our whole life. We love gas. And I've had a old induction portable stove that I just give to people and say, give this a shot. And everyone has been absolutely amazed on how easy it is to cook on induction and how efficient it is and how much control they have. So it's been one way to turn a lot of people off gas without and giving them a positive result in the end.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's a bit like lending someone, a skeptical person, an EV for a little while to drive around in, and realize how great it is. It's a really good strategy because people have a lot of, I don't know if it's misconceptions about the induction cooking, but it's a lot of familiarity with gas cooking and the belief that it's going to be not as good. So giving them a positive experience beforehand, I think that it's a great way of reducing that anxiety or just changing their mind.
Yeah, very much.
So you're talking about renovations there or new builds or a bit of both?
It's all renovations that we do.
When you take guests out of a house, is that complicated from a technical point of view?
Not really, not at all. It's a phone call to the gas company, get them to come and abolish it,
Yeah.
and they basically disconnect the meter, disconnect the line coming into the property, and then we do all our electric stuff on the other side.
And is there typically more? Obviously, you're swapping out a couple of different appliances like the cooktop in the kitchen, the stove. But are there other things that your electricians are having to do? Are you pre-wiring for solar PV or putting in batteries? Is there a lot more work now for electricians to do?
There is a little bit more work. The solar is going on to every project that we do. We live in a very sunny country, so it's crazy not to put solar on your roof. So that's always happening during the renovation. We did do a project where the client is still on gas, and it was an energy upgrade of a building again. And it was literally like a 2-week project. We didn't upgrade the windows because budget didn't allow for it. And it was just insulating the house. We pre-wired for a heat pump, which might come in a few years' time. So while we're insulating underneath the house, we're dropping all the wires down, insulating in between all the joists, membraning, battening underneath the joists and the membrane to hold it up in place, and then taping it off to all the walls. But we wanted to get all the wiring done beforehand. So it's
Yeah.
that question of what's the long-term plan on this house? And the clients are like, look, we want to electrify everything. We've only got a very limited budget right now. And we're like, okay, what do you want? Do you want a heat pump in a few years' time? Yes, would love it. All right, let's wire that now. We put an induction cooktop in at that point in time. So the only thing that's running on gas in that house now is instantaneous hot water.
So still have a gas connection in that case.
Yeah, which in a couple of years they'll get rid of and then upgrade that. And the wiring's all done.
And would that be a move to a heat pump water heater or okay? Are people using instant electric hot water in any cases, or are they generally going to a heat pump?
Generally going to a heat pump. We did put one instantaneous hot water system in. So we did a Enefit project where the main house, big house, that's gone Enefit. And then we've done a separate small house for the sun at the back of the property.
Mm-hmm.
And to have the hot water running out there from the main house, it was too long a run.
Yep.
It's only got that little studio at the back had a shower, hand basin, and then a sink, which wouldn't be used that much. So we were like, how about we use instantaneous? Because it's hardly going to be used. That was a good application of using a electric instantaneous unit. We already
Yeah.
had 3-phase on the house as well. But
Yeah.
it was a no-brainer because
Yeah.
you're not going to be using that much energy there. But if you had a heat pump separate out the back, there's a lot of cost to it, and it wouldn't be used that much. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't be a good use there.
It's the equivalent of using an electric resistance space heater in a small space that's not going to require a lot, even though it's nowhere near as efficient as a heat pump. it's a lot simpler. And if your demand is not that high, then the efficiency doesn't matter as much because
The overall usage is
the
going
overall
to
use is, yeah, is really small. So I see that in apartments and some really efficient buildings here too, where it's just simple to put a electric instant hot water on the outside as just a really clean solution. You mentioned three phase power. Is that normal, or how common is that?
I'd probably say about 10 to 15% of homes have three phase.
And what would be the motivation for putting that in?
So that particular house already had three phase. So
Right.
it was there. We used it. If you got a massive roof, you can get more phases exporting energy out. Car charging, it gives you some different options.
Yep.
And depending what you're using in the house, like you might have something that needs a three-phase motor.
Do you think that will increase if people are starting to think about faster charging for cars and putting in larger PV arrays? Is there a trend towards more sophisticated wiring, or is most of the standard equipment fine for what most people need?
I think in some instances more people will be doing it because they are wanting the faster charging.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if you've got a car, it depends on your usage of a vehicle as well. If you've got a car at home predominantly throughout the day and you're charging it via solar,
Yeah.
then you don't really need three phase, I believe,
Yeah.
because you can just slow charge your car and it's all good.
Yeah. It's pretty significant that you say all of your projects putting solar on. Is it subsidized? What are the benefits for doing that? I
So
know the benefits are there, but there's obviously not a huge financial hurdle for doing it.
it pays itself back quick enough. So it's usually
Right.
4 to 5 years that it pays itself back.
With a
And
subsidy?
there's a subsidy involved as well. The company that I use for install, they take it straight off the price at the front end.
Uh-huh.
And
So is
then
that a state subsidy just for New South Wales?
it's a national subsidy. It's called an STC, and I've forgotten what that stands for. But you can get it all around Australia. There are
Right.
different subsidies in Victoria as well.
And is it just for the panels, or are there other equipment like batteries as well?
Batteries, if you're changing from instantaneous gas to electric heat pump,
Oh yeah.
there's money back there as well. And it depends on the model and how efficient it is.
Yeah.
And if you are coming directly from gas or if you're coming from a resistant electric, there's a small difference there as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's some pretty good incentives, and there's a general market movement towards electrification, and certainly in your sphere and the type of clients that you attract. Do you know what the general feeling is out wider than that in the general population? Are people aware of electrification? Does it have a good name or a bad name? What would you see in the sort of here on Talkback Radio or in the comment section of the newspaper if anyone reads that anymore?
I think most people are very pro solar because electricity is getting so expensive over here, the world as well.
Yeah.
Um, we are quite blessed being in Australia because it does tend to be sunnier than most places.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you put solar up there if it's going to pay itself back in 4 to 5 years? It's a no-brainer, and
Yeah.
most people understand that as well.
It's impressive, and we were talking before about there being some regulations in place north of you and south of you in ACT and in Victoria around Canberra. I believe that were you saying that you're not allowed to connect or have a new connection to gas for new houses in Victoria now?
I understand it's all new subdivisions. They will not put gas in there at all. So when they're putting in a new area, there is no option to put gas in whatsoever.
Can people still get bottled gas?
I don't live in that area. I don't know, but
Right.
you'd be
But there's a pretty strong incentive or rules against it. So that's in Victoria, and nationally, has there been any talk of that being the ultimate where things are going for the whole country?
It'd be great to see that coming up, but I don't think it has yet. But I might just not know.
Yeah, yeah. That's the great thing about doing what you're doing with the people that you do it with, and the clients that you attract, and like you say, have those conversations with people that do have maybe some hesitations, and then you just show them what life's like with an induction cooktop, and they're away.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's 2025 got in store for you, Nick? What's the plan for your company? And you got a fairly steady work stream coming?
Yeah, so more Enefits coming up. So we've just finished our third certified, well, soon to be certified Enefit, because we really do focus on working in the inner city. We're based in Balmain and Sydney, which is 3K from the city. So everything we do is a heritage conservation zone, usually working on 100-plus-year-old buildings, which predominantly are brick. And yeah, we turn them into comfortable, healthy homes that cost bugger all to run,
Yeah.
just the whole aim.
You like the challenging stuff, don't you?
It's getting less and less challenging.
Is it?
Yeah, well, you know what you're dealing with now.
Yeah.
And we keep testing. We've just bought another house recently after we've sold our last one. And this one I want to tackle from the outside. Just single
Okay.
wrap. It's timber clad house. And I just want to do a single membrane because we're trying to make it as efficient as possible, cost wise,
Yeah.
if we can. I'm finding the blow-in insulation into the double brick walls. It's such an easy solution to do. And it costs bugger all in the grand scheme of things.
So you're going to go an extra layer of insulation on the timber clad. Would you take that cladding off, or would you leave it in place and wrap on the outside of it?
This particular project, our house, will be taking the cladding off because it's not in good form whatsoever. And we need to replace all the windows, and then we'll insulate from the outside,
Yeah.
wrap it.
Any concerns about what you might find when you start pulling the cladding off?
Not too many concerns because there hasn't been too many renovations to the house over the years.
Yeah.
Lots of hardwood, basically.
And I guess you're relatively dry. Do you often come across moisture damage or rot or anything like that?
A lot in Sydney. Yeah, because it's humid.
Okay.
One of my clients, who's also a colleague, Tracy, when we pulled apart her house to do a hempcrete build, which we did in 2019, 2020, as we're demolishing the house. So the makeup from the inside, it was gyprock, stud which had been insulated, a foil sarking, and then cladding straight on top of that, which, as we all know in Australia, was to code. The amount of condensation damage in an 8-year-old wall was incredible. The bottoms of the studs were gone. I'm walking on the roof going, this is bouncing a lot.
And it was only 8 years old.
And that was only 8 years old.
Wow.
So that was an eye opener. And that's why we use vapor permeable membranes. That's why we put in rain screens or vented cavities behind our cladding.
Yeah.
Like, it just really reinforced what we're doing is the right thing to do to avoid those problems. Because as we know, you get warm air from inside a house, travels through your wall and hits a cold metallic surface.
Yep.
It condensates, and that's inside your wall, which you've now got a moisture issue inside your wall, which you'll never see until you pull a wall apart.
Yeah. Yeah. Or feel it if you start walking around on something
on
that
the
shouldn't be bouncy. Yeah. It's a bit scary. Awesome. Hey, good to chat again, Nick. I'm really pleased that you're keeping yourself busy and people obviously valuing your work. And some really interesting insights into, it seems that electrification is happening, but I quite like the fact that it doesn't seem like a big deal to you because it's just what you do.
And as it should be. It's not very hard to do.
And that was Nick Sowden of Sowden Building Solutions. You can find him at sowdenbuildingsolutions.com.au. What do you think, Zach?
Great conversation. It was fun to hear that quote. It's getting less and less challenging when it comes to doing these deep energy and electrification retrofits. It's always good to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
I
there
also,
are some really good subsidies. We heard that with previous episodes and chatting to other my friends and associates around Australia. There's some pretty attractive support and funding available for people who are wanting to either change an existing system from gas to electricity, or if they're building new, there's some pretty good incentives there or reasons to just not even connect gas in the first place.
and then the example of the no new gas for new subdivisions in Victoria. That it was great to hear about. We need to stop burning stuff in our buildings, especially fossil fuels. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. Also, just the subsidies for solar panels that are built on top of the really advantageous economics for solar that already exist in Australia, given how sunny it is, that you're down to a 4-year payback, which is really great.
Yeah.
You know,
Just walking around and flying in and out of Adelaide, there are solar panels everywhere. That's been the case for a while. And also, I've noticed that flying across Melbourne and Sydney as well, you see a lot of pretty shiny roofs these days.
mhm.
But it's also now in fields, and we're sort of getting more commercial scale solar. So there are areas near my home where I grew up where there were vacant blocks of land or other infrastructure. So there's a wastewater treatment facility close to where I grew up, and they had some space around the perimeter of that facility. That's all covered in solar panels now, which ironically the other place I've seen that is actually Germany,
Mm,
where they had
right.
a big push, nowhere near the same level of sunlight, but they really pushed that a few years ago in including agriculture, where working farms may also have solar panels and it doesn't really impact the operation of the farm. It's just another potential income stream or another utility that's using that same space. So seeing that a lot around Australia. It's interesting being on the ground there for a week as I have just done, and finding out what the reality is versus what some of the things that you hear about over here. And it's easy to contrast. We do a lot of comparing ourselves here in New Zealand with Australia and things like what policies are in place and how fast each of us are moving towards things like more renewable energy. And it's a bit of a mixed bag on the ground. There's certainly really good examples of that happening. There's also pockets where there's still plenty of gas being used and new connections still being made, and quite a lot of advocacy and promotion, some might call it propaganda, from some of the
Mhm.
big companies who are promoting gas still as a quote unquote transition fuel. And I saw articles of that in daily newspapers and that sort of thing. Still got a long way to go, but it's really encouraging to hear about people like Nick and his team, and just that the fact that market exists, that there is a bit of a movement there.
Yeah, yeah. I was also struck by the step-by-step element that he's incorporating into his work. So that move to pre-wire for the heat pump hot water heater, for example, while insulating. So running the wiring and making that transition easier for the client when it's time to replace that equipment. That idea of having a long-term plan for a building and making the moves when they make the most economic sense is the way that we can make these deep energy retrofits really feasible for people.
Yeah.
So it was that was cool to hear about.
Yeah, and of course, renovation, remodeling, always really challenging. So I take my hat off to people like Nick. I really like the fact that Nick obviously really enjoys that work, and I think that takes a special kind of person. And I think it speaks to his experience as well and enjoying the craft of what he does, because you never know exactly what you're going to find until you start pulling an existing building apart. And that has all sorts of physical challenges, but financial challenges, working with the clients and figuring things out as you go. So doing that on top of moving towards more electrification and improving the thermal performance, changing the way the building works, increasing the air tightness, you have to be knowledgeable in quite a lot of areas. Yeah, I just find it really inspiring finding people like Nick who are also on the tools. He's intentionally keeping his team pretty small because he really enjoys doing that work as well. He doesn't want to just become a manager of a massive company and not have any interaction with the actual house. Doing some pretty cool work.
Yeah, it seems like a good balance.
Yeah,
It's good stuff.
nice work if you can get
Yeah,
it.
that's right. That's right.
Which he has. These guys have worked hard to be where they're at, and all credit to them. They're doing a fantastic job. So yeah, really encouraging to see. Like I say, we've got a wee way to go, but there are some really good things happening. I think in terms of that step by step, it's also a challenge that's still being worked out with regards to Passive House, because that doesn't always lend itself to certification, or at least makes that quite tricky. And I think that's an interesting ongoing conversation about how far you push towards an NFIT certification, or you're weighing up the budget constraints and also the practicalities of being able to do everything all in one go just so that you can get certified versus taking that approach over a long period of time. That's ongoing, that conversation. I think it's going to be interesting and an important discussion to have, because we have so many existing buildings in all of our countries that we represent. It's a big issue and a big challenge for us to figure out retrofitting.
Yeah, absolutely. And similar challenges, although different targets for the new Revive standard that FIAS has rolled out in the last several
Yeah.
months.
Yeah, because they have the option there, I think, of doing a progressive certification. Isn't that a feature of that standard?
With a plan. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you to Nick and his great work in New South Wales. As I said, you can check him out and follow him online. Go to Sowden, that's SOWDEN, buildingsolutions.com.au. All right, Zach, what have we got coming up on the accelerator?
Yeah, at Passive House Accelerator, we have a live program on Wednesday, February 12th. It'll be a project of the month focused on air tightness in residential retrofits by Tom Bassett-Dilley of TBDA. And on March 14th, so Friday, March 14th, mark your calendar, we have a special Reimagine Buildings conference called Designing for Fire Resilience. So we'll be diving into the key steps in fire hardening, the overlap with some of passive houses and passive buildings design approach with some of those fire hardening principles, and really examining how we can make safer, more resilient buildings while also ensuring or working toward a safer climate future as well. So we're really looking forward to that one. We have a great roster of speakers lined up, so that please join us for that. Speaking of Reimagine Buildings, on the Reimagine Buildings Collective, we've got a lot of fun stuff with experts and residents this week. So on this Tuesday, February 11th, we're joined by Skylar Swinford for a Technical Tuesday Modeling Ask Me Anything. Then on Thursday, February 13th, we have lesson 4 of our next level Secrets from the Pros course, and this is a Passive House Consulting Roundtable. We'll be joined by Ed May, Maureen Sanchez, and Lois Arena for that. And then on Friday, we have an Ask Me Anything session with Mary James and Steve Quarrell, where we'll be diving into the questions around fire hardening. Mary has fire hardened her own passive house in California, and Steve is an expert in fire hardening. So 2 great resources there. And we also would love for you to check out the Reimagine Buildings News podcast, which is the podcast of the collective. It is open and available on all the podcast channels. And we just shared a full episode of that here on the Passive House podcast as a bonus episode. So you can check that out, but also head over to Reimagine Buildings News on your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe to that, and you'll get some nice curated clips from these appearances by these experts and residents.
So much going on. A lot in there. The Passive House Accelerator has a calendar. So if you missed any of that, head over to there. You can also subscribe. Make sure you're getting the newsletter and notifications from both the Accelerator. And of course, do jump into Reimagine. Check that out. There's heaps going on. And if you do join into the collective, then you'll get lots of notifications and find out what some of those, all the great activities that are going on, and access to a lot of them included in part of that. So make sure you subscribe, check all that out. Lots of stuff going on. All right. Thank you, Zach. We'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast.